Gege Akutami, the creator of Jujutsu Kaisen, has already decided the ending for Megumi. He said that he knows how the story for Megumi will conclude. Is it his death? Is it reuniting with his sister and changing the world for the better just like Gojo wants? Is it mourning Itadori's death and living his life in misery as a sorcerer? Well, we are here to answer the many questions the community has. Megumi is clearly one of the most important characters, as he is Gojo's student, owner of an incredible technique, clan head, quick learner, fierce fighter, riddled with daddy issues. Well, you get it. You name it, he has it. At the start, Megumi seems like an ordinary sidekick, an emo black-haired guy with family issues supporting the much louder and talented MC. You know, but some of you would say another Sasuke. But unlike other characters, Megumi quickly proved that he is different and will take a new route that tells us that he is more than a sidekick. And looking from his role in the first arc until the current one, Megumi is rightfully the second protagonist of the story, becoming the reason for Itadori's survival and a major player in the decisive culling games. To be honest, Megumi has definitely impressed everyone in the fandom with his growth and development. However, being in the eye of the storm is not an easy task, and despite Megumi being only a teenager, he has some heavy burdens to carry that will determine what his ending will be. From the Jujutsu Society's point of view, Megumi might be the luckiest guy in terms of who he is. He carries the Fushiguro name, but he is the prodigal descendant of the Zenin Clan. But when we're talking about his ancestors, we can't move on without mentioning Toji Fushiguro, aka Megumi's father. Like father, like son, it makes sense that both Toji and Megumi are key characters in the story, but in totally different ways. Toji was the one to give Megumi his name, but perhaps that was only one of the only two things he ever did for his son. I mean, this dude completely forgot who Megumi was, or even that he gave him the name Megumi. But Toji was never a man known for loyalty or fidelity anyway, other than being excessively dependent on women. Look at the volume 9 extras, I'm not kidding. Toji was a man known for his strength and someone the Jujutsu world feared, loathed, and admired equally. Sounds a lot like Satoru freaking Gojo, right? Well, Toji and Gojo are certainly parallels of each other, but the biggest difference is that Toji did not have a drop of curse energy, despite being from the so-called reputable Zenin Clan. It was an abomination for his clan to even be associated with Toji Fushiguro. He settled for a bit when he had Megumi with his wife, but when she died, Toji also left the Zenin family along with Megumi. He married another woman who already had Tsumiki and took up her Fushiguro name, but Toji was clearly not someone to stay still and once again left his family. He turned into a playboy who used to gamble the money he earned from killing sorcerers. He even became known as the Sorcerer Killer, and the rest, you know, is history. Only having Toji to depend on, Megumi became a Fushiguro, but his Zenin story was far from over. Being the owner of the 10 Shadows Curse technique, which is the inherited technique of the clan, it was actually the worst thing to happen to the Zenin clan. To their distaste, the technique was inherited by the child of a person who was a shame to the clan's name. Naobito, the Zenin clan leader at the time, and Toji, they got into an agreement to trade Megumi for money just to bring the technique back into the family. Thankfully, this horrible deal of selling a first grader child, it actually never got completed because Toji indirectly asked in his last moments for, you know, Satoru Gojo to take care of Megumi and adopt him. Gojo took on mentoring and teaching Megumi, becoming like a father figure to him. That's how Megumi ended up as a protege of the strongest Jujutsu sorcerer whilst he was in the first grade. As for his views on Toji, Megumi was much more practical as a child than one would even imagine. He had no memory of his father, understandably because Toji seemed like he was around for barely even a year, even in the Fushiguro family. when he married his second time. And as such, Megumi had no interest in a man who was done taking care of his children. He didn't care what his father was doing or where he was. In fact, he assumed that his father and Tsumiki's mother were alive somewhere else, just choosing not to be their parents anymore. He also figured out that both of them used their funds from almost selling him to actually run away. However, Toji's impact on Megumi's life didn't end when Satoru Gojo killed Toji. In chapter 138, it is revealed that Naobito Zenin had an agreement with Toji that made Megumi the Zenin Clan head. We still don't know the details of when or how this happened, but this is definitely some redemption for the horrible father Toji was to Megumi, because it shows that he did care about his son a little to go to such lengths to get this done. This becomes all the more important because Toji thoroughly hated the Zenin clan and all that they stood for. He even went out of his way to cut his ties with the clan, as we saw before. But the Shibuya arc truly shows us how much he hated the Zenins and also cared for Megumi Fushiguro indirectly. Even if it was just his soul in someone else's body, he remembered his decision about selling Megumi. But the shocking part is that Toji looked like he was struggling to make this decision back when he was alive. He clearly didn't belong in the Zenin clan because of how they treated heavily restricted people, but he knew that Megumi would lead a comfortable life with his potential, but he still regretted it, which is why even in his last moments against Satoru Gojo, he thought of Megumi. He also realized that if there was someone who could break the deal with the Zenins as well as take care of Megumi, it was, of course, Satoru freaking Gojo alone, the strongest sorcerer in history. So knowing that he had succeeded in keeping Megumi away from the filthy Zenin clan via Satoru Gojo, it was enough for him to come to his senses. He asked Megumi his name, and when he came to know it was Fushiguro instead of the Zenin, he seemed pretty glad and ended his borrowed second life. But maybe this doesn't stop all the impact Toji had on Megumi's life, even without being there in the first place. We saw how Megumi doesn't know how his father died, or that his sensei Gojo was the one who killed him. Even though Gojo tried to tell him about it, he refused to listen. It will be interesting how this puzzle piece fits in the future arcs, since Megumi didn't even know that he fought against his father, the sorcerer killer at the Shibuya incident. We can even say that there is some confrontation between the two of them when Megumi learns the truth about his sensei being the killer, despite Gojo looking like, you know, a bit of a questionable man turning up, adopting this kid. At the end of the day, Megumi did end up in better hands with Gojo than the Zenin clan, along with his sister, whom he was very close with. Megumi's sister Tsumiki was also basically the only good thing that came out of his, you know, how do I say it, tragic life as Toji's son. Megumi and Tsumiki only had each other when both their parents died. Despite being step siblings, they both had a unique relationship. Just like Geto was the moral compass for Satoru Gojo, Tsumiki was for Megumi. And in chapter 59, Megumi has flashbacks to the time in school when he was like a punk. He used to get into fights very often to teach lessons to people. Moreover, he hated both bad people like bullies and good people like his sister. But even after getting the cold shoulder from Megumi, Tsumiki would nag him to not get into trouble and hurt somebody with his power. Instead, she wanted him to forgive people and think of his loved ones rather than bad people. Megumi was a rogue teenager, but Tsumiki filled the void he must have felt from his father's absence. She was someone not even Gojo could have been, because Megumi still found him to be stupid at the time, like the anchor to Megumi's unstable ship. That is, until she got caught in Kenjaku's trap at the Yasuhachi bridge and fell into a coma with a curse of unknown origins when Megumi was in his third year. This sudden occurrence was like a slap to Megumi's face. He learned the hard way that he was wrong and immature, and that he should have listened to his sister earlier. By some random crazy coincidence, he had lost the only person who deeply cared for him through everything. They had stuck together all this time with nothing common between them since they were step siblings with no parents after all. But this incident made Megumi realize his mistakes and learn his purpose. He had nobody and nothing to protect earlier, but he now wanted to protect his sister. Just like Itadori came to the conclusion that he is a cog in the machine, Megumi had realized this way earlier. In chapter 9, Megumi decided to save people for his own goal, whether it was fair or not. He just wanted to be the weapon for karma as a sorcerer and ensure more good people received fairness. Megumi's ideology is also very similar to what we saw of Higuruma in the culling games. Whilst both of them wanted to create a fairer society by making sure the criminals get punished, Higuruma's policy as a lawyer was much more realistic. On one hand, Megumi divided people into black and white, meaning that people were either purely evil or purely good. For example, in chapter 6, Megumi said that he wouldn't save a criminal from the detention center because he wasn't worth saving owing to the crimes he had committed. But for Higuruma, people were not labeled good or bad until he understood the circumstances about their actions. His client in chapter 159 was branded guilty by the system, but he believed that his client needed to be protected because he was innocent. Higuruma didn't perceive or write anyone off as guilty, unlike the childlike mentality of Megumi. However, in a way, his sister helped him realize his morals as a sorcerer, even if he still retained part of his mindset from the rebel days. It also became the foundation of his ideology, which is to treat others how you want to be treated. We can say that saving good people is what led him to save Yuji Itadori, who was bound to die immediately by Jujutsu law. The most insane part of all of this is that Megumi helped Kenjaku's plan to continue by insisting that Yuji Itadori should be kept alive. Sadly, a huge part of Megumi's life was just a strategy that worked out in Kenjaku's favor, but this did give him Yuji Itadori as a best friend, and who wouldn't want my guy as a best friend? I do. This guy's awesome, and he helps him to cope with his depressing reality. Even before his sister's coma, Megumi had cherished her to the point that he always kept her first, even above himself. He also helped with the siblings' living expenses by getting financial aid through the Jujutsu school and Satoru Gojo. In fact, he only agreed to be under Gojo's wing because Tsumiki would be treated well rather than with the Zenin Clan. He also picked the tough path of Jujutsu mainly to protect her, but he failed to do so. How, you may ask? Well, the Shibuya and Culling Game arc are brutal for everyone involved because of their deadly consequences. There is barely anyone who hasn't lost anything in the Shibuya and Culling Game arc, with Megumi having one of the hugest loss. But the largest shock to him was that whilst his sister woke up from her coma, she was revealed as a player of the Culling Game. Since Megumi knew his sister would die, whether or not she took part in the game or not, he decided to enter the Culling Game and change its face by adding new rules to protect his sister again. We can see how determined he is on saving Tsumiki and how fiercely Megumi is fighting his battles. But when we are talking about Megumi's losses, we must talk about the actual person who solidified his Jujutsu moral code, who is none other than Satoru Gojo.
Okay, so let's talk about Gojo and his relationship with Megumi. Gojo is the father figure, kind of like a godfather or an eccentric uncle in Megumi's life, since he raised Megumi from when he was just 6 years old. Even though Megumi calls Gojo all sorts of names like stupid, he still respects Gojo the most. That is because Gojo, above being weird and a jackass, saved him and Tsumiki. He gave Megumi the power to choose whom he wants to save with his powers. In the eyes of the prideful kid that Megumi was, Gojo is someone who knows all of his vulnerable sides. Which is why we have hints that Megumi does not willingly depend on Gojo. For example, in chapter 58's flashback, Gojo says that he was surprised Megumi asked Gojo to train him. So whilst Megumi feels a bit insecure about his position under Gojo, he knows that Gojo is the person who alone knows Megumi the best. Only Gojo can help him overcome the weaknesses he has. But this is also shown that from the start, Gojo gave Megumi what he didn't have until now, which was freedom of choice. Gojo allowed Megumi to choose between accepting or declining his help every step of the way. This is because Gojo knew that for someone as mature as Megumi at a young age, it was important to do so. When Gojo took Megumi in, he himself was only 18 years old, but he made sure to guide Megumi's morality in the right direction. Even though he had no debt he owed to Megumi or Toji, Gojo had always wanted to save people with potential and strength like Yuta. Whilst it did start as Gojo being Megumi's benefactor, Gojo probably became the reference point for Megumi to measure his own strength. After all, Gojo is the strongest Jujutsu sorcerer. Furthermore, Gojo was also the first Jujutsu sorcerer Megumi came across and knew so personally. Gojo embodies everything that Megumi knows about Jujutsu from a young age, and hence Gojo's ethics also influenced Megumi's philosophy. Megumi believes that he can't save everyone, so he has to choose who he helps. This is reflective of how Gojo believes it's his duty to save lives since he is the strongest amongst everyone else. Gojo's views on the Jujutsu world are also Megumi's views. Whilst Gojo learned the hard way that the Jujutsu society is rotten, Megumi developed the same understanding through his mentor. Despite having the blood of the Zenin Clan, he hates them and all that they represent almost as much as Maki does. Even when Megumi became the head of the Zenin Clan, he didn't change his attitude at all. In fact, he found it as a means to help him and his friends to achieve bigger goals like winning the culling games. Megumi's decision to use his domain expansion the first time came around because of Gojo as well. Gojo taught him the difference between dying to win and risking death to win, which meant that Megumi had to value his life. Once again, this was Gojo drilling the morals of being a proper sorcerer into Megumi's mind. He even went as far as nudging Megumi in the correct direction of growth. In chapter 117's flashback, Gojo told him about the heads of both of their clans and how they had killed each other with their techniques. Indirectly, Gojo was telling Megumi that he could be as strong as Gojo himself someday. He wanted Megumi to realize that he had an incredible potential to unlock if he tried to do so. In every major point of Megumi's life, we can see that Gojo was there. Even if he wasn't there physically, his teachings to Megumi were. It is also because of Gojo saving Yuji that Megumi began to see that there might be some flaws in his ideology after all. His mindset began to shift slightly because he started to accept that it isn't easy to judge who is good or bad, and that even good people like Yuji can do great harm if left alive. But he was also the one who told Yuji in chapter 6 that there was no guarantee someone you save won't kill someone in the future. Hence in chapter 143, Megumi says that it was both of their faults that people died at Shibuya because Yuji was unable to control Sukuna. The meaning of Megumi and Yuji's conversation is a direct parallel to how Gojo and Geto owned up to their mistakes together. It wasn't upon just one of them to face all of the consequences, but both of them because they were both at fault. But talking more about Megumi and Yuji, their dynamic is a crucial plot point in Jujutsu Kaisen. Megumi basically saved Yuji by asking Gojo to keep him alive and thus began a friendship that had survived life and death, quite literally. But there are some serious aspects of this friendship that are beyond both of them. Like we saw, Megumi is indirectly responsible alongside Yuji for all of the mistakes Sukuna makes when he goes berserk. Even Yuji knows this, which is why he questioned Megumi for saving him. And we know by now that the reason behind Megumi's choice is simple. He sees Yuji and Tsumiki as the same type of people. Good ones. He just had to save Yuji to live up to his own philosophy. But because of this, Megumi's fate is now intertwined with that of Yuji. Whilst Yuji's end is still unclear to Akutami yet, will Megumi be tossed back and forth by fate until he dies like a fool, as Regi said before his death? Most likely, yes. Yes, he will. And that'll be because he wants to save Yuji from whatever fate comes for him by the end of the series, which is most likely death. Megumi will also want to put his all against the most dangerous curse of all time, Ryomen Sukuna, who also has an unknown plan for Megumi. Hopefully, Sukuna is just a massive Megumi simp like the rest of us. I mean, just look at him! But I suppose we all know that Akutami's dictionary does not have any word even resembling hope. So...
I don't know.
This plan is most likely Sukuna's reincarnation using either Megumi's body or his 10 Shadows curse technique. Those that have the notification bell on would know that, because we did a detailed 2-part series covering this topic, providing all of the evidence. In the early parts of the story, Sukuna has even made a binding vow with Yuji that the kind host doesn't even remember according to the conditions. But Sukuna chanting in chain would force Yuji to give up control to him, and this could be some pretty bad news. We have no idea of Sukuna's other plans except returning to power as the king of curses. And, of course, it would not come without the price of the lives of our favourite duo and the people important to them. We even saw Yuji struggling to make a choice to keep Megumi safe from Sukuna if Yuji loses control again. It would be the worst case scenario if Sukuna grabs hold of Megumi whilst Yuji is unconscious after all. This 3-way connection between Sukuna, Yuji and Megumi adds so much suspense to the characters' relationships and actions. How will Megumi survive the end of Jujutsu Kaisen if both his best friend and sister are caught in the clutches of Kenjaku's plan, whilst the King of the Curses himself wants to use him for his own reasons? Who knows what terrible ending Akutami has in store for Megumi, but if the King of Curses himself is involved, we know it can't be good for anyone. The crux of Yuji and Megumi's relationship can be summed up in one quote: "Love is the most twisted curse of them all." Be it both them wanting to save each other or living up to their moral codes by putting themselves at risk, they both are always standing at the very edge of doom at all times. If Yuji dies, Megumi will lose his best friend, a reminder of how his sensei lost his own best friend as well. And whilst this is simply Yuji's fate, Megumi got entangled in it all because of a decision he made because of his cultivated ideology. Megumi's depressing reality is one of the driving forces of Jujutsu Kaisen. Akutami is cooking up a lot of story elements based on the ending he has set up for Megumi, making his role in the story one of the most pivotal. Tsumiki and Yuji are his links to both Sukuna and Kenjaku, and both of their true motives are completely unknown, with only small hints to point at it. Even though Megumi is getting stronger with every arc, he is still just a teenager or a cog in the machine as he believes himself to be. He only wants to protect his sister. Will she be free of Kenjaku's clutches? What about Yuji? And what if Akutami sets Megumi to give up his life to save the people around him? It would surely devastate us all, but hopefully he develops up to his full potential so that he can stand tall over his harsh life. What do you think of Megumi's life until now and his future? Let us know in the comments, hit like, subscribe and check out this video on your screen right now because it is a banger. I'll see you there.